He never thought anyone would notice the way his hands trembled when Sophie asked about Daddy James. Never expected anyone to see through the careful mask he wore every morning at Intel, or the exhaustion that clung to him like Portland's autumn rain. But the night his neighbor stepped closer and softly said something that would change everything. Marcus Thompson realized he hadn't been hiding as well as he thought. Marcus had been fighting 3 wars for 2 years. The first was visible, raising 8-year-old Sophie alone in their Alberta Arts District apartment. The second was professional, navigating Intel's Hillsborough campus, where being openly gay felt like career suicide. The third was battling ghosts from his military service under Don't Ask, Don't Tell. Every morning began the same way. Sophie's backpack by the door, her inhaler in the side pocket, lunch packed with precision. The drive to Woodstock Elementary was 15 minutes of Sophie's chatter. 15 minutes where Marcus could almost forget the weight against his chest. But dropping her off meant facing other parents who assumed he was divorced, not widowed by a virus that had torn through their community. Intel's campus sprawled across Hillsborough. Marcus had been an engineer there 18 months, understanding the unspoken rules. Keep personal life personal. Become invisible. But hiding takes energy. Marcus never had enough of. By the time he collected Sophie, helped with homework, made dinner, and got her ready for bed, he felt hollowed out. David Chen lived directly across the hallway. Marcus knew his name from mailboxes, knew he worked from home based on quiet video calls through thin walls. They had never exchanged more than polite nods. That changed on a Thursday evening when Marcus returned to find Sophie sitting in the hallway. Backpack clutched against her chest, tears streaking her face. The after-school program had closed early. Sophie had taken the bus home alone, sitting outside their apartment door for 45 minutes, too scared to ask for help. As Marcus fumbled with his keys, a door opened across the hall. David Chen stepped out. David crouched down to Sophie's eye level. "I was scared. Dad was at work and I didn't know what to do." "That sounds really scary," David said. "But you were smart to wait here where it was safe." Sophie brightened. "Are you the one with all the plants?" "I'm David." "I'm Sophie. That's my dad." Marcus. Marcus wanted to retreat, restore boundaries. But Sophie continued talking. "We used to have plants. Daddy James had a whole garden on our balcony, but he got sick." Marcus finished quietly. David's eyes met Marcus's across the hallway. Recognition. Acknowledgement of loss without need for explanation. "Maybe I could show you other plants that are hard to kill," David said to Sophie. Sophie brightened. "Really?" Marcus felt familiar panic of promises being made, of Sophie getting attached to people who might disappear. But David stood and addressed him directly. "Only if it's okay with your dad." The kindness in that simple boundary check undid something in Marcus's chest. "Maybe," Marcus said, meaning it more than he expected. As Marcus unlocked their door, Sophie waved goodbye to David. Inside their apartment, the silence felt different, less heavy. That night, Marcus stood by their kitchen window looking out at the courtyard. David was watering plants on his balcony for the first time in 2 years. Marcus considered they didn't have to carry everything alone. Sometimes the greatest gift we offer someone carrying invisible burdens is space to exist without judgment. Subscribe to Heart Stories for stories about healing. The next morning arrived with Portland's November drizzle. Marcus stood in his kitchen, coffee growing cold, watching David tend to plants on the covered balcony. Sophie sat at their dining table, drawing a garden in purple crayon. "Dad, do you think Uncle David really meant it about showing me plants?" Sophie asked. The casualness with which she had assigned David the title of uncle made Marcus's chest tighten. "I think he meant it," Marcus said carefully. At Woodstock Elementary's drop-off, Marcus noticed Jennifer Walsh approaching. Jennifer was one of those parents who seemed to have everything figured out, always asking questions that felt more like gentle interrogations. Sophie mentioned something about her daddy at the school's family tree project. Emma was confused about whether Sophie has 2 dads or if one is a stepdad. The question hung in the air like a trap. Marcus felt the familiar weight settling on his shoulders. Sophie had two dads, Marcus said quietly. James died 2 years ago. Jennifer's expression shifted immediately. Oh, I'm so sorry. Was it an accident? He was sick, Marcus said, which was true enough and final. Enough. That must have been so difficult. Do you have support? Marcus thought about David watering plants across the hallway. We manage, Marcus said, reaching his car, driving to Intel. Marcus replayed the conversation. At work, being Marcus the engineer was easier than being Marcus the gay widower. At lunch, Marcus sat in his car, eating a sandwich. On impulse, he opened the Notes app and began typing. Things Sophie needs: a garden, someone who remembers James without pain, permission to be excited about new people. Things I need: sleep, someone who doesn't need my story explained, help without judgment. Things David offered: kindness to Sophie, respect for my role as her parent, no pressure for explanations. Marcus stared at the list before deleting it, but the words lingered. That evening, as Marcus and Sophie climbed stairs to their apartment, they could hear quiet music from David's door. Sophie knocked before Marcus could stop her. David opened the door, flour dusting his apron, the scent of something warm and cinnamon sweet wafting out. I'm making cookies, David said simply. Would you like some? Sophie looked up at Marcus with hopeful eyes. Marcus found himself nodding before his usual caution could intervene. Inside David's apartment, everything felt carefully tended. Plants lined windows, books filled shelves, and the small kitchen held cooling racks covered with snickerdoodles. Sophie immediately gravitated toward a succulent garden on the coffee table. These are the hard-to-kill ones, David said. That jade plant only needs water once a week, maybe less. Sophie reached out to touch the thick leaves. Daddy James had one like this, but it died after he got sick because Dad forgot to water it. Marcus felt heat creep up his neck. I'm not good with plants. David handed Sophie a warm cookie and looked at Marcus with understanding. Not judgment. Plants are forgiving. Most want to live. When Sophie started yawning, Marcus knew it was time to leave. But as they gathered their things, David handed Marcus a small terracotta pot with a jade cutting. For practice, David said. If it dies, it does. If it lives, maybe we can try something else. Walking back across the hallway, Marcus carried the plant carefully. Sometimes healing begins with the smallest acts of faith, like accepting a cutting from someone who believes you capable of keeping something alive. Over the next 3 weeks, something shifted in the rhythm of Marcus and Sophie's days. It started small, David leaving coffee outside their door on mornings when Marcus looked particularly exhausted, Sophie drawing pictures of plants and slipping them under David's door, the jade cutting thriving on their kitchen windowsill. Sophie had no such reservations about seeking connection. She knocked on David's door with increasing frequency, always with some urgent question about plant care or a drawing to share. David never seemed annoyed by the interruptions. Instead, he invited her in to water his plants, teaching her about soil moisture and different plant needs. Uncle David says plants are like people, Sophie announced one evening over dinner. Some need lots of attention, some just want to be left alone, but everyone needs the right kind of light to grow. At work, Marcus found himself distracted by thoughts that had nothing to do with chip architecture. During a team meeting, his coworker Jake mentioned his backyard garden with enthusiasm. The key is starting small, Jake said. Don't try to grow everything at once. Pick a few things that are hard to kill. See what works in your space. Build from there. It was the same advice David had given Sophie about the jade plant. Start with what's forgiving. See what survives. Build from there. That evening, Marcus found himself knocking on David's door. Sophie was at a sleepover, and the apartment felt too quiet. David answered in paint-splattered clothes, a small canvas in his hand. His apartment smelled like turpentine and cinnamon tea. I didn't know you were an artist, Marcus said. I just paint sometimes when I need to think through something. David set the canvas aside. Tea. They settled on David's couch with steaming mugs. Through the window, Marcus could see into his own apartment, the jade cutting visible on the kitchen windowsill. "Sophie mentioned you offered to teach me about plants too," Marcus said. "She's really excited about the idea of having a garden, and I don't want to disappoint her." David's expression grew serious. "I wasn't being polite. I genuinely like to help. But I should tell you something first. I was a foster kid, bounced around a lot. Plants were one of the first things that made me feel like I could take care of something, create stability when everything else was chaotic." The air in the room shifted with the kind of honesty that makes people either closer or more distant. "James was the green thumb," Marcus said quietly. "After he died, I let everything die too. I was angry at the plants for outliving him." David nodded slowly. "Grief makes us irrational about all kinds of things. When my foster mom died, I threw away every plant she'd given me. But I started again when I realized that killing her plants didn't honor her memory any more than keeping them alive would bring her back." Marcus felt something loosen in his chest. "Then maybe we could start planning. Small things. Hard to kill things." David smiled. "I'd like that." Marcus thought about that conversation as he walked back across the hallway later, carrying a notebook filled with David's sketches of balcony garden layouts. Tomorrow, when Sophie came home, they would start planning something real, something they could grow together. Building community wasn't about grand gestures or dramatic revelations. It was about showing up consistently, about paying attention to the small needs of the people around you, about believing that someone was capable of growth even when they doubted it themselves. The call came at 2:30 in the morning on a Tuesday in December. Marcus jolted awake to his phone buzzing, his first thought going to Sophie sleeping in the next room. "Marcus," David's voice was tight with controlled panic. "I'm at OHSU with Sophie. She's okay, but she had an asthma attack, and I think you need to come." Marcus was already pulling on clothes. "What happened? How did you—" "I heard her coughing through the walls around midnight. It kept getting worse, and when I knocked, she answered the door. You were asleep and she was struggling to breathe. Her inhaler wasn't helping." Marcus drove through empty Portland streets, David's voice calm but strained over the hands-free connection. Sophie had woken up coughing. The air quality had been poor all week. Her rescue inhaler had run out, something Marcus should have noticed. "She's stable now," David said as Marcus burst through the emergency room doors. "They've got her on a nebulizer treatment. Room 12. Marcus found them in a small curtained area, Sophie sitting on an examination bed with a plastic mask over her face, her eyes wide but no longer panicked. David sat beside her, reading from a book about dragons. "Dad," Sophie's voice was muffled by the mask, but she reached for Marcus with both arms. Dr. Martinez explained about air quality and rescue inhalers and the importance of having backup medications. She asked questions about Sophie's asthma history that Marcus answered with increasing embarrassment. When had he last checked the expiration dates on her medications? Did he have an asthma action plan posted at home? "It happens," Dr. A. Martinez said with professional kindness. "Single parenting is incredibly difficult. The important thing is that she's okay and that you have systems in place going forward." Systems, action plans, emergency contacts. Marcus realized he had been operating on a day-to-day basis that left no room for contingencies. David had known what to do because David had asthma too, something Marcus learned as they sat in the quiet hospital room. David had developed it as a teenager in foster care. "I recognized the sound," David said simply. "And when she couldn't catch her breath, I knew we needed to get her here fast." "I didn't even hear her," Marcus said, guilt settling into his bones. "You're exhausted. When's the last time you slept more than 5 hours in a row?" They were discharged at 8 in the morning with new prescriptions and follow-up appointments. Marcus called in sick to work and spent the day reorganizing their apartment around preparedness. David helped, creating systems where none had existed before, emergency contact numbers posted by the phone, backup inhalers everywhere. an asthma action plan taped to the refrigerator. "You don't have to do all this," Marcus said. "Yes, I do. Not because you can't handle it, but because no one should have to handle everything alone. I need to list you as an emergency contact," Marcus said. "For school, for her doctor, for everything. If you're willing." David's expression grew serious. "Are you sure that's not a small thing?" Marcus thought about Sophie's relief when David appeared in the hospital room. "I'm sure, yeah. If you're willing to be responsible for her sometimes." "I'm willing." In that afternoon, they filled out forms, emergency contacts, medical information, insurance details, the mundane paperwork of creating a safety net that Marcus hadn't realized he needed. "What happens if something happens to you?" David asked carefully. "Does she have other family?" James's parents never accepted Sophie as their granddaughter. "My parents died when I was in the military. There's no one else." David set down his pen. "So if you get hurt or sick, Sophie goes into the system," Marcus finished, "unless I figure out something else. There are legal options, guardianship arrangements. If you wanted to explore that possibility, I would be honored to be considered." Marcus looked around their apartment, taking in the evidence of the life they'd built together. "I'd like that, to explore that possibility." That evening, Sophie helped Marcus cook dinner while David watered the plants on the balcony. Through the kitchen window, Marcus watched David move between containers with patient attention. "Uncle David saved my life," Sophie announced. "He helped you when you needed help," Marcus corrected gently. "That's what people who care about each other do." "So we all help each other with different things. That's the idea. Sometimes safety comes not from independence, but from interdependence. From building relationships strong enough to weather crisis, generous enough to share resources, and deep enough to trust someone else with the things that matter most." 6 months later, Marcus stood in the courtyard of their apartment complex watching Sophie and David transplant seedlings into larger containers, their hands dirty with potting soil. Their conversation focused on giving growing things more room to expand. The spring air carried the scent of cherry blossoms and Sophie's laughter. The garden had grown beyond their original modest plans, spreading from the balcony to include containers throughout the courtyard, transforming the concrete space into something abundant. Marcus had been working on a presentation for Intel's first ever LGBTQ+ employee resource group, something that hadn't existed when he started, but had emerged from conversations with supportive coworkers. The ERG was planning a Pride Month celebration, and Marcus had become the point person for organizing community partnerships. "You nervous?" David asked, noticing Marcus's abandoned laptop. "Terrified," Marcus admitted. "Standing up in front of the entire engineering department and talking about being gay and raising a daughter feels like painting a target on my back." Sophie looked up from her seedlings, soil streaking her cheek. "Why would anyone want to shoot targets at you for loving Daddy James?" Marcus felt the familiar catch in his throat. In the months since they'd started building their expanded family with David, Sophie had begun talking about James more freely, sharing memories without the careful anxiety that had marked her grief before. "Some people might treat me differently at work if they know more about our family," Marcus explained. Sophie considered this seriously. "That seems dumb. You're still good at computer things whether you love Daddy James or not." "You're absolutely right," David said. "And that's why what your dad is doing matters." The Pride celebration had grown beyond anything Marcus had originally envisioned. Basic Rights Oregon was participating. The Portland Veterans Administration had agreed to set up a table about LGBTQ+ veteran services. Even Dr. Kim from the Children's Hospital was offering information about LGBTQ+ family health resources. That evening, Marcus sat at his kitchen table finishing his presentation while David prepared lunches for the next day. "Read me the conclusion," David said. Marcus scrolled to the final slide. "Building inclusive workplaces isn't just about policies. It's about creating environments where every employee can bring their whole self to work, where the diversity of our experiences makes us collectively stronger." The next morning, the presentation went better than Marcus had expected. His colleagues asked thoughtful questions. Jake volunteered to help with next year's planning committee. Even his manager stayed after to ask about resources for her nephew who had recently come out. But the moment that mattered most came when a young engineer named Alex approached Marcus in the parking lot. "I wanted to thank you," Alex said, clutching one of Sophie's jade cuttings, "for talking about your family, for making this space feel safer. My partner and I have been talking about having kids, and it helps to see that it's possible." That evening, Marcus found Sophie and David in the courtyard garden, harvesting lettuce for dinner, while neighbors gathered around the growing collection of plants. Mrs. Rodriguez was teaching children about pepper varieties. The college students were sharing herb cuttings. The retired teacher was reading to kids from a book about gardens. "How did the presentation go?" David asked. "Good, really good. I think we might have actually changed some minds today." Sophie looked up from the lettuce she was carefully harvesting. "Did you tell them about our garden?" "I told them about families that grow in unexpected ways, about communities that form when people pay attention to each other's needs, about creating space for everyone to flourish." Sophie nodded seriously. "Like how plants need different kinds of light, but they can all grow together if you plant it right." Marcus smiled, understanding that Sophie had grasped something essential about human community. Exactly like that. As the sun set over Portland, Marcus stood in their garden, surrounded by the people who had become his chosen family. The jade cutting on their windowsill had grown into a small tree, reaching toward the light. Around them, the evidence of care and attention flourished in containers and raised beds. The life they'd built together hadn't looked like anything Marcus had imagined when James died. But it was a good life, rooted in mutual support and watered with daily attention that transformed strangers into neighbors, neighbors into friends, and friends into chosen family. Sometimes healing doesn't mean returning to what was lost, but growing something entirely new from the soil of experience. Sometimes the most beautiful gardens emerge from places where loss has taught us to pay closer attention to what remains, to nurture what survives, and to plant seeds for a future we couldn't have imagined. What moments in your own life taught you that community grows strongest when we show up for each other? Share your story in the comments below, and subscribe to Heart Stories for more reminders that transformation begins with the smallest acts of mutual care.